I'm very fortunate today to be here with Paul Ryan, who's going to tell me and you a little bit about his incredible work, Meet After Rembrandt.
Yes.
This is a recent work, Paul?
This was painted sometime mid 2019, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So quite recent. But I have been painting Meet on and off for almost 20 years now.
So there was one work in particular that you mentioned to me by a painter called
Joachim Buchler.
Joachim Buchler.
Something along those lines.
Which initially inspired your own sort of forays into exploring sort of meat as a message.
Yeah, basically, the very first meat painting I ever did was called Hearts and Minds. It was actually painted around the time that George W. Bush took the US to war.
Oh wow.
To Iraq, and he talked about going there to win hearts and minds, which I found particularly ridiculous because, well, the idea of my painting was that there was this skinned cow's head, there was a heart, there was a side of beef. The only hearts and minds we're going to see through this are the actual hearts and minds of the blown up humans.
The visceral sort of guts of the soldiers and civilians who are killed. Wow, okay.
So anyway, I found this wonderful artist, Joachim Buchler, a Flemish painter from the mid-16th century. And he'd done this incredible painting, The Butcher Shop, which had this fabulous scene of these cuts of meat, beautifully rendered. And that was my first introduction to, and probably some of the very earliest paintings of meat, actually.
Well, you were saying as well earlier today that this was kind of like around the time that our modern notion of what a still life is was sort of invented or created. Do you want to tell?
Yes.
So, a little bit about that.
So the uncle of Joachim was a guy called Peter Aertsen, also a Flemish painter who worked out of Amsterdam and Antwerp. And one of the main sort of genres of painting at that time were religious paintings, and in those religious paintings would be some flowers, some fruits, some abundance, some produce. He took those objects and he brought them right in front. They became the main subject, and the religious motifs receded to the background.
I think that's also like, again, as you were saying, it's that notion that this is the first time that there was a middle class outside of either aristocracy or the church who could actually commission works to be made. So it was sort of an indication of those changing tastes. You were also speaking about removing the religious figures and in fact bringing in peasant figures into the works. But even then, you were saying that they had to be put in sort of as a morality tale. They couldn't just be put in as real people.
Yeah. So Peter Aertsen, who had made this great leap, made a second, even greater leap, and took the religious figures out and started painting the butcher and the maids and the peasants who worked with these produce. And this was particularly loved by the art collectors and the people who commissioned these works, who were wealthy landowners and liked to show off that they could afford to eat meat every day and had incredible access to a selection of very fine foods. At the same time, they liked, and they thought it was quite funny, that the paintings with these peasants and butchers and so forth, there wasn't what morality tale. In that painting, The Butcher's Shop, the butcher is seen to be completely blind drunk. He's holding a tankard up and he's sort of looking one eye down to see how much is left. Behind him is the butcher's helper, groping from behind a young maid and getting his hands on her boobs. And I mean, we can look back and laugh at it.
But very much still a morality tale. Peasants
weren't
worthy of the richness of the rich man's table.
Exactly, they weren't worthy.
Their place was predicated on that moral bankruptcy, which is why sort of wealthy people were wealthy and poor people were poor. Was that moral degeneracy?
It was very much so. And there's actually a Latin saying, voluptas carnis, which means the sins of the flesh. So the actual painting of the meat was actually there was a coded message in there saying that this flesh represents carnal joys, and that's something that we are to be frowned upon. That we must remember at all times to be good and godly.
Well, that sort of very conveniently brings us onto your own beautiful painting of flesh, and I'm sort of curious, sort of first of all, how it fits into your own oeuvre of work, because you paint magnificent still lifes, painted many very successful portraits as well, all with this incredible, thick, sumptuous, sort of rich, visceral paint, which I think, again, something you were saying to me earlier, just works very well for the creation of flesh and for of meat.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little about your process?
Sure. When I started doing these meat paintings for the very first time, to my great joy, realised that meat was the perfect subject to render with thick oil paint using palette knives. I'm literally, as I'm making these great marks in one sweep, literally creating meat on the surface. And so, initially for this painting, you can actually see one of the sketch lines with the Sharpie there. I've done a drawing. I've basically set up the structure. Then when I'm painting, this actually occurred in one sitting, this painting. Put the music on and just mix the paint, and then it's just this ferocious, it's a performance, and I'm exhausted afterwards. There's happy accidents happening all over the place. You don't really know. I half mix colours. I'll grab 3 or 4 or 5 colours on a palette knife this big and just do a great big movement. And if I'm lucky, it works. And often it does. I mean, after painting for over 30 years, you start to learn how to corral your happy accidents.
So then is it a case of sometimes there aren't any happy accidents and you've made a painting of that and you come back to it and you're like, no, it doesn't work and it has to be put aside?
That can and does happen.
Yeah.
And even in a successful painting, if we look at this section here, there was another skinned cow's head right here. It hadn't worked, so I took literally a foot-long palette knife and scraped off. And on the texture of this very heavily textured canvas was this beautiful print.
Well, yeah, you can see it. I mean, I'm sure we can hopefully get a little close-up of that. But you're almost mimicking that thing that Gerhard Richter does, of where he puts the paint down and then lets the movement of the paint almost sort of bring the image to the forefront. It's
letting the paint do what it naturally wants to do.
And something else that sort of, again, in that process of making, particularly on this scale, because you step back and you can see what it is, particularly on a computer screen or a phone screen. But you mentioned one of your secrets about how you keep the work you achieve that sort of balance and almost symmetry in it, so that it never feels lopsided, despite the fact that you're having to work on quite a big scale all the way. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? Because
sure.
For me, certainly as a maker of painting, it's a pretty interesting way of doing it.
So I have a couple of techniques. One is I'll literally stand here, I'm mixing the paint up, I'll put the paint on, I'll turn around. On the opposite wall of the studio is a big mirror. I can see a reflection of this painting in the mirror. Then I'll stand back. I'll look here again, I'll go, okay, this is what I need to do next. Mix up again, go, and it's just this. I must do about 5 Ks in the studio.
This is why you're exhausted after the painting. So I think it's really curious, that you're sort of looking at the painting both the way that it is, but then the reverse of it at the same time. And you were saying that you'll use previously binoculars, but now your phone to make sure that even on any scale, the painting still holds up balance, because you can see it. Another thing that I was loving in this was these. I don't know if you're giving away trade secrets here, but the blues mixed into this indigo. So you got cobalt blue and indigo here. There's for a very dark painting. When I initially saw it, it was online. I thought there was a lot of black in it, but there's almost no black in it at all. It's all just you're achieving that contrast, that drama, just with with color rather than with tone.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting in a big area that's going to be all one colour, especially dark, is to have some variation in there.
Sure.
And you put those little bits of blue, and that cobalt's so beautiful. It just seems it sparkles out.
Yeah.
And the indigo I use literally looks black until it's thinned out or mixed with white, and then you can see a sort of bluish tinge. There's another trick I learned many years ago. If you mix dioxane mauve, which is an incredibly dark, almost black purple, with a very dark hooker's green, you mix those two in just the right combination, and you get the blackest black.
Yeah, with that beautiful richness.
It's
and depth
a rich and deep
really
black.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And so I'm always looking for.
But you're still letting, like even in these gesture marks, you're still letting the canvas, sort of like that empty space come through. For me, it's a terrifying thing to see bits of canvas there, because you're sort of looking behind the curtain. But yet, the absence of paint is almost as important as the paint itself.
I think in this particular way of painting, this sort of very fast, thick, expressionist work, it's it's quite okay to leave bits of canvas exposed. And in fact, you don't realise until you get close up that that's happened. And then I think it's quite exciting for the viewer to see that. In many ways, you're seeing the structure. You can see some of the undermarkings on this where I've drawn it. I like the idea that you can see the sort of, you can almost see the scaffolding there. I like that. It's, you know, you can see the edges here. I haven't gone all the way. Then some paint sticks out. It's clearly a painting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's made of paint. It's a celebration of the paint. But, you know, this paint is buttery. It's juicy. It really is quite carnal. It's almost sex on canvas.
I think carnality is the perfect word for the painting. And then another thing which sort of struck me again, talking about kind of like the types of work that you do. Do you consider it a straight up still life painting, or is it just a painting that happens to be sort of quasi still life?
Yeah, I do consider these to be still life.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, in the true sense, because this thing was actually live once and now it's quite still because it's dead.
Good point.
So there's that aspect to it. And I like the idea that it can push still life into a sort of dark, gothic, grotesque area. But, you know, the traditional idea of still life as a fairly passive painting that hasn't got much to say, which, as both you and I know, doesn't have to be the case.
Absolutely not. We spent some time talking previously about the role of sort of explaining paintings and trying to write about paintings, and, you know, sort of almost treating it as a translation problem, or if work needs too many words around it, then perhaps it as a painting isn't working. And one of the lovely things, which is one of my big credos, is how does a work make you feel when you stand in front of it? Yeah. Do you have an emotional response to it? And all of the words and all of the framework about art is built on that initial feeling, because it's such an instinctive way of sort of speaking or communicating with somebody.
Yeah.
It's an incredible work, Paul. Thanks for talking to us about it, and I'm delighted to have that opportunity to talk to you about it. So
yeah, and I'm going to talk to you too, Jonathan, as a fellow painter of the still life.
The still life. That's it, bringing the still life back.
Yeah.